we need to talk about Jane Austen's genius use of Shakespeare in Mansfield Park. Hi, my name is Mary. I make videos about plays. And while I was reading Mansfield Park earlier this year, I was blown away by how much theater is just littered throughout these pages. I also read the play that almost causes a scandal in Mansfield Park, Lover's Vows, and I'm working on a video for that. So subscribe if you'd like to see it. It's in the works. But today, we're going to be talking about the Shakespeare play that makes an appearance in Mansfield Park. And it's actually the only Shakespeare play that is ever read aloud during one of Austen's novels, and that is Henry VIII. At first glance, it might seem like Henry VIII is only there to facilitate a larger conversation about Shakespeare and reading aloud and theater and acting, all of which are major themes of the novel. But if that's the case, Austen could have chosen any Shakespeare play. So why choose Henry VIII? Well, I read it recently, and I realized so quickly that this is not just a throwaway choice. She very intentionally chose Henry VIII to be the play that they read aloud in the scene of Mansfield Park. And today, we're going to figure out why. Now, before we proceed, a little bit of a clarification. Jane Austen definitely does mention Shakespeare and reference Shakespeare in many of her other works. In fact, in Sense and Sensibility, Marianne and Willoughby are said to be reading through Hamlet together, which is so ironic. However, we don't actually see this happen in the book. We're just told that it's happening. In Mansfield Park, we actually witness the scene where the Shakespeare text is read. I'm going to take a minute to sort of set the scene here in Mansfield Park. So if you know all this context, you can go ahead and skip to the timestamp that I have highlighted below. At this point in the novel, Fanny Price is under immense psychological pressure. In fact, I would almost say she's under a kind of psychological warfare to accept a proposal from Henry Crawford. Now, I like to explain Mansfield Park kind of like this. In the first half of the novel, we see with Fanny a mountain of evidence that Henry Crawford is a scumbag. He's ugly on the inside and outside, yet he somehow manages to sleazily cozy up to Fanny's cousins, Mariah and Julia, and he flirts with both of them. To pit those sisters against each other, even while one of them is engaged, he puts Mariah in the most compromising positions while her fiance is right there, all with no intentions of proposing. He trifles with others' affections and really just has no sense of respect for anyone other than himself. At about the halfway point through the novel, this scumbag, Henry Crawford, hatches a plan to make Fanny fall in love with him. He says to his sister, who's also terrible, by the way, "But I cannot be satisfied without Fanny Price, without making a small hole in Fanny Price's heart. Her looks say, I will not like you. I am determined not to like you. And I say, she shall." It's really only out of a sense of competition and challenge that he pursues her, not because he actually likes her. The previous day, she rebukes him. She stands up to him for once, which is a big deal for Fanny. And it's this challenge. It's the fact that she doesn't like him that makes him want to control her. But what this all adds up to is that the second half of the novel is all about whether or not Fanny Price can be conquered by the very man who we have so much evidence against. If you're thinking of Lizzie and Mr. Collins, you might say, oh, this should be easy, right? Rejecting a man's proposal. But Lizzie's rejection of Mr. Collins in Pride and Prejudice is small potatoes compared to what Fanny is facing here. Mr. Collins is embarrassing, okay? He's awkward. He's not in any way desirable, right? But Mr. Crawford is desirable. He has near perfect manners, and everyone around Fanny seems to be totally enamored with him. And so she has to stand alone, facing all of this pressure from everyone in her life against Henry Crawford. It's as though Mr. Willoughby or Mr. Wickham is courting her, but she knows She knows that they're bad guys, but everyone else around her doesn't. This is the kind of pressure she's under. When Mr. Crawford isn't successful in just flirting with her, instead of giving up, he proposes to her and makes this everybody's problem. This would clearly be an upwardly mobile marriage for Fanny. And he's a great guy in the world's eyes. He's a perfect Prince Charming. And what's worse is that she can't even defend herself. Her knowledge of Crawford comes from knowledge that implicates her cousins, Julia and Mariah. And so when her uncle is confronting her about it, like, why won't you marry him? She can't exactly tell tales out of school on her cousins. She's stuck doing the honorable thing, kind of defending her cousins, yet she knows that Crawford is a bad dude. Thus, her uncle thinks she's like a disobedient wretch, right? It doesn't make any sense. She's a real obstinate, headstrong girl. It's insane to him. Crawford makes Fanny look crazy to the people around her. It's this kind of gaslighting where she's the only one who knows the truth, and everyone else is trying to convince her of what some of them think is the truth, that he's a good guy. Even when she refuses Crawford's proposal, her best friend Edmund and her uncle, everyone tells Crawford to keep going, right? To keep asking, not to give up, right? They take her no away from her. And so she's stuck, kind of receiving and trying to rebuff his attentions. Most confusingly of all, though, is that Mr. Crawford seems to be gaslighting himself. And so it starts to get kind of confusing because it seems like he's had an actual change of heart. It seems like he's actually in love with her. And so you start to think as you're reading, well, Fanny, he's changed. Fanny, don't be so hard on him. Fanny, he really loves you. Are you really going to hold what he did earlier against him? It's not that big a deal. However, Mr. Crawford cannot have a change of heart because he does not have a heart. It's empty on the inside. You can't change what's not there. As this psychological torment is just heating up, Shakespeare enters the scene. When the men join the women after dinner, of course Crawford's there. Fanny's already rejected him, but he's still hanging out, just Mr. Hopeful, Mr. Puppy Dog Eyes. Fanny was reading a volume of Shakespeare aloud to her aunts, but as soon as the men come in, she stops. She's not about to keep performing in front of Mr. Crawford. He's scaring her to death. So Mr. Crawford takes up the book that Fanny put down, which is Henry VIII. Why would Austen choose Henry VIII over another Shakespeare play? Just looking at it from the surface, there's one reason that comes to mind, right? Henry VIII is known for having multiple wives. Crawford may not have multiple wives, but he is going to run away with a married woman later in the novel. He's also proven that one woman is not enough for him, having already flirted with Julia and Mariah simultaneously. Henry Crawford even shares a name with Henry VIII, so I don't think we can throw away that association. I think that's very much there. However, as we see in the text, there are some other things going on as well, some other parallels that I think Austen wants us to draw, and they start with Cardinal Wolsey. So Lady Bertram says she was in the middle of a very fine speech of that man's. What's his name, Fanny? Crawford takes up the volume, and as soon as he mentioned the name of Cardinal Wolsey, she says, that's it, that's the very speech. So Cardinal Wolsey is going to be a figure that we need to watch out for because he's the first named character. Now, there are limits to my Anglophilia, okay? I do not know everything about Henry VIII's courts, but from the very first scene of Henry VIII, it is abundantly clear that Cardinal Wolsey is the villain. You might not expect that, seeing as he's a man of the church, right? Listen to some of the things that are said about him in Act 1, Scene 1, and let's apply them to Crawford, because there's very clearly a parallel going on here. No man's pie is freed from his ambitious finger. Doesn't this just scream Crawford? How he can't be satisfied with just one woman, but he's sticking his finger in all these different pies? They also call Cardinal Wolsey spider-like, out of his self-drawing web. And spider-like is a great descriptor for Crawford too, laying his web, laying his snare for Fanny to catch her. Again, about Wolsey, I can see his pride peep through each part of him. And you know his nature, that he's revengeful. Prideful and revengeful. Both are kind of the reasons why he's going after Fanny in the first place. Revenge that she didn't like him, and pride too that she didn't like him. They also call him a holy fox or wolf or both, for he is equal ravenous as he is subtle. And they say he does buy and sell his honor as he pleases. Which brings me to another outrage, which I forgot to mention earlier about Crawford. He goes and talks to his uncle and gets his uncle to make William, Fanny's brother, a lieutenant. And he's not just doing this out of the goodness of his heart, right? He tells Fanny this in the same scene where he proposes to her. He says, I've got this great news. Your brother is a lieutenant, and guess what? I'm the one who did it. And guess what? You should marry me. He puts her into his debt. He puts himself over her. He puts her in his power by this sort of subtle, wily method of buying and selling honor. William, I mean, as great as it is that he got his lieutenantship, he didn't earn it, right? He kind of had to go through this back door, which doesn't feel good. And again, it's just a manipulation tactic. Cardinal Wolsey and Crawford also have in common the way that they ingratiate themselves with people in power. Cardinal Wolsey, actually, the first time we see him enter, the king is like leaning on his arm in the stage directions. It's really weird. When else would you see a monarch who supposedly is like strong and in the prime of his life actually leaning on another person? And it's on Wolsey. He's made himself central. He's made himself indispensable to these people. And likewise, Crawford has sort of made himself indispensable around Fanny. Even Edmund has to like him. He's ingratiated himself with Edmund because Edmund is trying to propose to his sister, right? So he's just kind of snuck his way in there and never minds that the Crawfords are just mooching off of the Bertrams throughout the whole book. He's at the center. He's made himself a pillar for these people who are so important to Fanny. And so it's impossible, or almost impossible, for her to escape him. However, it would be too simple, too basic, if Austen was just trying to say he's a villain, right? I mean, you could have him read for any villain. He could be reading for Iago or Richard III or something like that. I mean, there are specifics to Wolsey, but wouldn't any villain have done the trick? Wolsey is a more complicated figure than that. All of those descriptions just came from Act 1, Scene 1. Kind of like how all of our terrible visions of Crawford are coming from early on in the novel. But he starts to change. Wolsey starts to change, and it seems like Crawford does too. Now, it may be hard to believe that someone who is such a villain could possibly have a redemption arc. And Queen Katherine feels that way about Wolsey too. She refuses to have him be one of her judges. When Catherine's called to testify in divorce court, she again refuses to have Wolsey be one of her judges, calling him my most malicious foe and not at all a friend to the truth, which is so similar to the way that Fanny views Crawford. A malicious foe, an enemy to the truth. These are words that ring true for both of them. Yet in Catherine's case, we see that she might not be entirely right about Wolsey. Wolsey, it seems like, maybe has not been Catherine's enemy. Katherine might be wrong. We see or we hear testimony from the king himself that Wolsey has not been advocating for this divorce. In fact, he has ever wished the sleeping of this business, never desired it to be stirred, but oft have hindered the divorce proceedings. Which means that, okay, well, maybe Maybe Catherine's wrong about him. Could Fanny also be wrong about Crawford? So even the audience starts to think that maybe Catherine's wrong. Maybe she's just making a mountain out of a molehill. Maybe she needs to get over it. Kind of like Fanny. The gaslighting continues when Wolsey and another cardinal visit her kind of in her private chambers. And it's really difficult to know who to believe in this scene. Wolsey gives her this piece of advice. The hearts of princes kiss obedience, so much they love it. But to stubborn spirits, they swell and grow as terrible as storms. He's telling her how valuable obedience is. And let's be real, disobedience is the thing that Fanny is being charged with. And it's the reason why she's sent back to her family and sort of banished from the house. This idea of being forced to seem disobedient. It's similar in both texts. Catherine and Fanny are being put in a similar position. And I think Austen, maybe she trusts her readers' knowledge of Henry VIII, but I think she sees that parallel as well between Fanny and Catherine. Both of these women are forced to look unmannerly, unwomanly in the eyes of the people around them in their harsh rejection of these characters, Crawford and Wolsey. And another thing that Catherine highlights is how unfair the battle is between the two. As a woman, she hasn't had the same kind of education. She hasn't had the same kind of practice speaking in the court, right? She's outmatched by these men, despite being, overmatched in terms of honesty and being a good person. These men have a real advantage over these women in these situations, and Catherine calls it out in a way that I think Fanny is experiencing as well. In the divorce court, Catherine, after being given these sort of wily excuses, she's forced to trust her gut despite it making her look bad. And she says, I am a simple woman, much too weak to oppose your cunning. You're meek and humble-mouthed, you sign your place and calling in full seeming with meekness and humility. But your heart is crammed with arrogancy, spleen, and pride. These men have the craft to make themselves seem a way that they're not. The women don't do that. They just have to call it out, even when it makes them look bad. Fanny is constantly being faced with Crawford's cunning. And this is part of why she tries not to speak when he's around. He's trying to draw her into speech, knowing that if he can get her to talk, he can catch her in her words and perhaps change her mind, right? Get her to show some sign of liking him back. Her only safety is in silence because he can't twist her words that way. When she starts to sort of rebut him or join conversation with him, our text says she stopped, felt herself getting into a puzzle, and could not be prevailed upon to add another word. Her best defense is silence here, because Crawford and Wolsey, they're both very convincing. Eventually, though, Wolsey's craftiness is his downfall. It's discovered that, well, Catherine was right. He wasn't ever really on her team. He might have counseled Henry against the divorce, but that's just because he didn't want her to marry Anne Boleyn. He wanted her to marry the French king's sister or something like that. So it wasn't that he didn't want him to get divorced at all. He was just trying to play for something else behind the scenes. And when this is discovered, it's his undoing. It's also discovered that he's been keeping a lot of the taxes for himself or kind of enforcing extra taxes. And once all this is discovered, it's over for him. And at this moment, though, it seems like Wolsey goes through something of a true conversion. Again, a redemption arc of sorts. He says, vain pomp and glory of this world, I hate ye. I feel my heart new opened. Had I but served my God with half the zeal I served my king, he would not in mine age have left me naked to mine enemies. So these are just excerpts of much larger speeches where he repents and laments the life that he has lived and turns anew to God, into living a virtuous life with what's left of it. Wolsey becomes a testament of sorts that conversion is possible. Like redemption is possible. Maybe we're supposed to understand that it takes, being discovered in your crimes and repenting for them beforehand, which Crawford has not done to this point. But we do hear, or Catherine hears rather, someone reports to her that Wolsey died fearing God. Catherine also hears, men's evil manners live in brass. Their virtues we write in water, which is so interesting. We're in Act 4 of the play. Wolsey's gone from being the villain to being someone I think we're meant to feel bad for. Maybe because there are new villains rising, right? There's always going to be a new villain. This guy Wolsey, it seems like he really did have a change of heart. And so it's interesting to imagine, like, what would Fanny be thinking as she hears Crawford give these speeches? Is she associating him more with the villain side or with his ultimate redemption? So if Fanny's sitting there hearing it said that, men's evil manners live in brass, their virtues we write in water, it's possible that she's hearing this and feeling a little bit chastised, right? She's holding all of Crawford's previous behavior in brass when maybe it should just be water, right? Maybe his current good deeds of promoting her brother and visiting her at her family soon, his love for her, maybe all that should be in brass and the bad stuff should be in water. So it's kind of an interesting conundrum that Austen puts before Fanny in this scene, ultimately influencing her and maybe being a part of her manipulation and making her stand strong or waver in her answer to Crawford. Henry VIII is also a genius choice here because it does lead naturally into these questions of good and bad clergymen. The clergy is such a major theme in this text. In fact, it's one of the main telltale signs that the Crawfords are morally bankrupt, is their view of the clergy. So Mary Crawford, for instance, the only reason why she's not getting married to Edmund is because he's of the clergy. Right? He doesn't have enough ambition for her. She says of the clergy before she realizes that that's the path that Edmund's on, that the clergy have the best intentions of doing nothing all the rest of his days, nothing but eat, drink, and grow fat. It is a want of all laudable ambition. A clergyman has nothing to do but to be slovenly and selfish, read the newspaper, watch the weather, and quarrel with his wife. Some fighting words here from Mary. She is no big fan of the clergy, which, you know, maybe she's actually seen that in some cases. I mean, not all clergymen are good clergymen, as we see in Henry VIII. But what we see in Henry Crawford is perhaps a more insidious view of the clergyman. It sounds good on its surface. Crawford seems to speak highly of the clergy in some ways. He says our liturgy has beauties which not even a careless, slovenly style of reading can destroy, right? He says even those clergymen who read poorly, they can't destroy the beauty of the liturgy. But it's more about the beauty for him. It's more about how things seem. It's the style of worship rather than the substance that means something to him. As he continues on, he says, 19 times out of 20, I am thinking how such a prayer ought to be read and longing to have read myself. Again, it's entirely the style and how something is read, the performance of the reading, more than it is about the reading itself, which is problematic, which again shows his kind of shallow facade nature. He's attracted to facades. He doesn't really care what's behind them. He says too that when he hears a good sermon, he thinks, oh, maybe I want to be a clergyman, which on the surface, again, is like a better opinion than his sister Mary has. But his reasoning is truly telling. There is something in the eloquence of the pulpit, when it is really eloquence, which is entitled to the highest praise and honor. You think, oh, of course. It's the eloquence he cares about, not the actual substance. So he's attracted to the glory of it all, to the acting of it all, which brings us back to the theater, right? Crawford is an actor, and he's the scariest kind of actor because he's always playing a part. He's always playing a character, and he doesn't seem to realize it. He can't actually be earnest. He can only act earnest. When you can only seem and you're no longer being anything, he's lost touch with his being, which makes him almost not a human anymore. When you can only seem but can't actually be, you lose touch with your being. Crawford has lost touch with his soul. He's almost like an automaton. He's a non-human anymore because he's only ever seeming, not actually being. Anyhow, that's all for now. I hope this video brought you a little bit of insight into either Henry VIII or Mansfield Park, maybe both. Personally, I really enjoyed Henry VIII. I found it a lot more exciting and compelling than I guess I thought, because you don't normally see Henry VIII performed. Like, I've never seen it performed. I don't think I've even had an opportunity to see it performed. It's not a very popular play. It's not six, right? But it is not boring. It is extremely fascinating. And maybe I'll make a separate video on the most exciting portions of it at some point. Likewise, I did recently read Lover's Vows, which is the play that takes a much more prominent role in Mansfield Park. So if that's something you'd be interested in seeing, you can go ahead and tell me in the comments. Or not, I'll probably make it either way. But subscribe so that you see it when it comes out. Yeah, thanks so much for watching the video. Hope you have an excellent day. Bye!
It cannot be that you are wholly unaware of what I feel for you. Ever since that moment when we led the dance,
Mr. Crawford.
all that I have done, all that I feel is for you, and you alone. And so, I offer you my heart.
No, don't.